Hey, hey everybody. Welcome in. We have sound, we have light, we have visuals. Thank you all for being here. As Bitcoin bounces around $30,000, this gives us time to take a step outside our normal path, but a step that is critical for you all to be aware of. There are many that are relying on their pensions in the future, and this video is about a word of caution. Why you should be very careful banking on that money, whether it be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line. This applies to people if they are 60 or 20 or 65 or any age group. So again, these are trying market conditions, but this is important to know. So the question is, are pensions Ponzis? Whether they're public or private, we're going to go through everything you need to know. And this is the father of the Ponzi scheme, in case you're wondering who that was. So, quite a clever fellow. And just a reminder, for people who don't know what a Ponzi is, it's when you take money from others to redistribute to others in a pyramid scheme. Hence the word pyramid. So let's go. Math, money, and freedom. And of course, this is actually probably financial advice because, again, it's important for everybody to have a plan. Without a plan, you're toast. So this will help you make a plan that is like a plan B, not the plan A, which could be your pension scheme. So the story, real quick, it's a story of pensions, retirees, demographics, money, models, retirement accounts, and governments are often full of crazy ideas. We've seen that very recently. But sometimes they should not be considered real solutions in desperate attempts to render the laws of economics moot. This is what this story is about. Again, moving us further into the full state of modern voodoo economics. We're seeing that everywhere with money printing, with retirement. But what you're going to see is going to be pretty alarming. So without that, let's talk about tomorrow. We have the CPI print coming out, and the CPI spike precedes recessions. We know we're in a recession. It's pretty much guaranteed at this stage. Tomorrow we get that print. So we'll see what happens. But the key, really, why it's important to look at the inflation number is because that eats away at your pension. Imagine you've got a defined benefit that pays you $400 a week and debasement is 15% a year. That eats away at that. And back in the day, $100 went a long way in a grocery store. Today it's $300 to get pretty much the same amount of food. So first of all, a bit of boring stuff. There are two main types of pensions, the defined benefit and the defined contribution plan. Quick reminder for you all, a defined benefit plan guarantees a set of monthly payments for life. Okay, if you live to 150, you can collect for that many years. If you retire at 60, that's a big bag of money, another 60 years plus, 70, 80 years plus of payments. Now, a defined contribution plan creates an investment account that grows throughout the employee's working years, and the latter depends on factors such as the amount you pay into the pension scheme, and it has many different labels all over the world. In the US, it could be 401k, etc. And it also is a function of the performance of what you invest in. And the former can be eaten away through debasement. So that's first thing, get that out of the way. Second, there are public and private types of situations. The defined, for example, public employee pension plans tend to be more generous than ones from private employers. And private pension plans, of course, are subject to regulation. But sometimes the public ones can be very generous. I know people that work in the military and Coast Guard and sanitary services and places where they are waiting to do their 20 years so they can retire off the very fat plan. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then there are also private pensions. For example, a car company. I'm not going to mention the name of this car company because I don't want to offend anybody, but it's American. And here, basically, this is a car company with a huge pension plan which was only slightly funded by the automobile operation. So basically, it was an illiquid pension fund with a huge medical care problem and a car problem too. So that's just the nature of how these companies can evolve. So let's talk about the Western world as well. A lot of this will be about demographics as we go forward. So you can see here, this will sound very crass, and I know I don't want to be offensive to anybody, but the West is not breeding or dying. So people aren't having babies and they're living a hell of a lot longer than ever before. So that's, I'm not going to say if it's a good or bad thing, but The problem arises from over-generous increases in pension benefits that have already pushed contribution rates to the limit. Let me talk about what that means exactly. Americans complain about Social Security contribution of about 12.5% of pay. Germans have to put up about 19 plus 20%. And other places, it's even a lot higher. I think in Italy, the contribution rate is about 33%, which is astonishing, of pay. 1/3 of your pay goes to your pension plan. Now, over the next 20 years, Western populations will age at a record rate. And again, they're not dying, which is a great thing. But the ratio of over 65s to those aged 20 to 64, i.e. the working population, will double. Japan's working age population is already declining, and it will start to shrink drastically, as with other places like China too. And either benefits must have in relation to average income, or contribution rates must go a lot higher, and you can't give more than 33% of your paycheck to a pension scheme. So we're running out of the ability to fund this stuff. But it gets worse. So let's talk about not just Japan, but Chicago as a case in point. Just a city in the United States. Fascinating to look at this. A key demographic, the ratio of active workers to pensioners, is even more concerning. These are government workers, and you have approximately more beneficiaries than active workers. So how the hell are you going to fund that? And this, I'm giving cases from all over the world, but they all apply equally all over the world. But these are just anecdotal stories of situations that happen. Now let's talk about the tipping point, as I call it. Workers per retiree tipping point is typically 3. You need 3 people between the age of 20 and 65 to support 1 retired worker. And per this chart, and I can't remember I got this, but here I think it was The Economist. But the calculus has dramatically changed. You will see here you have, countries with very thick social blankets, for example, that have very good benefits. But even as you go forward, look at these numbers, look at these lines. The only one that's above the tipping point right now is Russia, and it's about to go under in the next couple of years. Everything else is under that tipping point. So there's no way out of this calamity that we are in, i.e., think of that. 3 workers for every retired person. Japan, it's already 2 for 1, and that's not enough. China, pretty much similar. So let's spell out that math just to hammer it home, because this is why it's so important. 3 people need to work to support every retired person, and that's the simple math, and we don't have that right now. Elon Musk talks about this a lot. He has warned of a looming population collapse in places like China and in the Western world. And he spoke, I think it was recently in the last 1 or 2 days. It was in BBC Future website. And he said, most people still think China has a one-child policy. China had its lowest birth rate ever last year, despite having an upgraded 3-child policy. People just aren't having kids. They're not having kids in Italy. They're not having kids in China. They're not having kids in Japan, etc. And China will lose, this is the drastic number, 40% of their people every generation. It is a population collapse, and China is facing a major demographic challenge as the workforce shrinks in the rapidly aging country. And its birth rate hit a record low last year. I think 10.6 million babies were born in China for a place with a population of nearly 1.4 billion. And this is the worst recorded data ever since the Communist Party took power in 1949. Staggering numbers. This is why China is going to places like Africa. They're saying, come on in, we need you. All over the place, they just need growing population. The US closing the borders needs that too. Common problem. Let's talk about the cost of retirees real quick. Retirees are expensive. This is a retired New York sanitation worker. This is from the New York Post. And I do not begrudge this sanitation worker his pension, but it's nice, $285,000 a year. And it's far more than double what he earned when he was working. But let's look at California. This is a California administrator, government worker, earning $400,000 a year in retirement. Note, this is paid for life. This lady, lucky her, 40 would be nice, could retire at 60, 62, and live for another 40, 50, 60 years. earning 400,000 a year indexed. How many workers does it take each year to fund that 400,000 for that one lady? A lot. So let's talk about getting back to other states and other information. This is an Illinois teacher union. We talked about unfunded state pension liabilities grow to $8.28 trillion. These numbers are staggering. The most unfunded liabilities are California, about $1.5 trillion, Illinois, $600 billion, Texas, $530 billion approximately, New York, over $500 billion, Ohio, nearly $500 billion. And again, it's a big problem. And also, if you turn this around, if you look at the bottom 10 states, you've got places like that have a per capita unfunded liability per capita in Alaska, 42,000, 43,000, Illinois, 42,000, etc. It's just out of control. And this is not isolated to the United States. Same in Germany, same in Greece, same in Italy, same in other parts of Australia, etc., United Kingdom. So let's talk about another example. This is, again, Chicago. They seem to be in a little bit of hot water. This is old data. Can you imagine how bad it is now? Chicago pensions are only half to a quarter funded. And that's in 2017, the only data I could get. But across all these different groups, like the poor firemen and poor policemen hoping for retirement. Remember, hope is never a strategy. So let's talk about other big picture items. This is the US debt clock here. I blew up the unfunded liabilities. I talked about these before. 170 trillion. Medicare liability, 35 trillion. Social Security, 22 trillion. And growing every day. Unfunded. The money isn't there to pay these people. So the question is, when will Social Security run out? And it's the same all over the world. Just a nice chart from Statista. Social Security in the US covers old age, people who survived, people who are disabled, etc. Shows that here the asset reserve is supposed to run out sometime in 2034. Whenever I say that, people get very angry in the comments and no, that's not possible. Well, it just came forward another year because of C-19. So that's the problem. It could even run out as early as 2031, but don't shout at me. This is per the, I can't remember the name of the group, OASI and DI combined, and additional calculation, etc. It's all publicly available information. You guys can look it up, but it's staggering. People are paying a huge part of their paycheck, and their employers are paying a huge part of the paycheck into this fund that is going to be out of cash real soon. So this is another interesting angle too out of the United Kingdom. I know a lot of people here, and I actually know a number of physicians in the United Kingdom and global physicians that were trained in the United Kingdom. But this is an interesting conundrum. Is the UK government obviously desperate to retain its most experienced doctors, nurses and civil servants? Staff vacancies are up about 25,000 compared to a year ago. Over 110,000 openings for medical staff in the UK. So what's the problem here? Well, the number of doctors opting for early retirement has more than tripled since 2008. And there are, I think, 1,500 fewer family doctors to cope with an additional 3 million patients since 2017. That is not good, especially during these pandemic times. Now, many in the public sector and a few outside have so-called final salary pensions. This is important. They provide an income for life linked to inflation. The conundrum is that while they are working, their pension entitlement bills in line with their salaries, which are rising slowly in the public sector, if at all. And once retired, on the other hand, their pensions rise in line with inflation. So they quit earlier to get out faster. I also know physicians that work in California that are on the same salary in public hospitals for the last 10 years. Zero raise. So this is desperate. And that's just one cohort within all employees. Let's talk about returns. This is from Mercer. Big thank you to Sanjay for sharing this with me. And the motivation for this. Now we get to the section with the fours. As you know, I love numbers. And this is just during the month of May. Treasury yields decreased for early maturities, but increased for later maturities. Just the only thing you need to know about this chart here is the red line is the spot rate yield curve. The blue is the coupon regression curve, basically what Mercer pay on funds but it hovers around 4%. And 4% is not going to cut it in an inflationary environment when the real debasement or inflation is more like 15%, not the 8.1 or 8.3 the government says. Now let's talk about unfunded liabilities and what's going to happen over the future. And here we have data out of Australia, Canada, China, India, Netherlands, UK, US, etc. What's staggering here is we are beyond crisis. The savings gap resembles the amount of money required in each country, including contributions from governments, individuals, and employers, to provide each person with a retirement income equal to approximately 70% of their pre-retirement income. And outgoings such as personal savings, taxes are often reduced in retirement, and targeting 70% of pre-retirement income is in line with OECD guidelines. But remember, look at this, 400 trillion is the shortfall by 2050. Let's call it 25 years away. That shortfall is approximately $60,000 per person on Earth, just for these countries. It is just, anyway, and that is 4 times the average salary on Earth as well, which is crazy. Probably a lot more than that. So let's talk about the cost of fiat and impact of this. And the reason this all circles back to Bitcoin and Saifedean Ammous is he said something at the Bitcoin conference, which I had to reshare here as well. He points out another 4, the 14%. So average annual expansion of fiat is 14%, which means dilution is 14%, which also that 14% is the same as the average stock market returns. And every year, humanity loses 3.5% of global wealth, which is about $14 trillion, which is about $2,000 per person. Boom. Think about that. So again, if you're not making 14%, the big takeaway here is forget the 14 trillion, but if you're not making 14% on your funds, your retirement fund, you're staying flat. You're not making squat. That's the big message here too. So let's talk about S&P 500 yield. The real yield is below zero. If you look at this chart here, you'll see the yellow line is the S&P nominal yield, and the black line is the real yield. This is the inflation-adjusted yield is below zero, which is a massive red flag, ladies and gentlemen. And a story came out last week from the Wall Street Journal that I think it flew under everybody's radar, but it talked about its potential outsized implications. Now, in California, again, going back to another example, CalPERS is the largest pension fund in the United States, $500 billion, voted for the first time ever to begin using leverage in the portfolio to achieve its stated annual return goal of 6.8%. Let me zoom out for a second, all right? We need to make at least 14%. CalPERS' target is 6.8. So their fund is shrinking by 7% debasement every single year, and that is kind of crazy. But it gets worse. Its board of governors also voted to increase its allocation to alternative investments, raising its private equity allocation from 8% to 13% and adding a new 5% allocation to private debt. They are chasing alpha, ladies and gentlemen. They don't have enough to make it, so now they're moving their funds out the risk curve to make more alpha. So for all the Bitcoin maxis out there thinking, ooh, why don't they invest in Bitcoin? Well, I don't know. They really should do a Ray Dalio and have 1 to 2% allocation, which will at least compensate, as I did in a previous video, I'll add here, it'll compensate for the actual debasement. Just that small little tweak. And again, 25 billion, they'll lever up is only 5% of the fund, but it's a clear sign that real yield, real alpha is hard to find these days, and that could implode the fund if they invest in the wrong hedge funds, etc., wrong private equity. It could go catastrophic. And in the past, of course, pensions were only invested in the safest things like bonds and treasuries, which now suck. Anyway, enough of that. So the question is, beyond that too, what happens to your retirement funds? So this was an interesting piece too that talked about how at least, for example, 75% of Goldman Sachs revenue is allegedly made this way. Let me explain the playbook of what they do. Imagine you have an IRA or a 401k or I can't remember what they're called in the UK or Australia, your fund, and you have it with an asset manager. Okay? What they do, they basically lend out the stock that you have and hedge funds, etc., use it to short. They borrow, kind of akin to all that rehypothecation we see in the crypto space. So, hey, Bank A, hey, I need 100,000 shares of X. Could be anything. Could be Tesla. Could be Apple. It could be General Motors. Asset manager, I got you, bud. And then your shares are now earning yield and being used in some cases to short the hell out of your Tesla or whatever, a la Bill Gates. This is how the big money system works. Oh, and by the way, then the asset manager gives tips to other banks, hedge funds, and banksters. Hey, short Tesla because hedge fund Y is doing that. And the asset manager gets yield on your assets. This is a huge part of what's happening too. But the point I'm mentioning this is your assets are stored with an asset manager to grow, but they're lending them out so other people can use them to short the stuff that you're actually investing in as a retirement. So it's just mind-blowing. Anyway, this is a inspiration for this tweet from Zaitsev11. What you're saying is that my IRA custodian is lending out the underlying in my retirement account in order to not only profit for themselves, but also enable the underlying to decrease in value. Yes, that's exactly how it works. So we're seeing that. And that, the whole Gamestop manipulation is a classic case in point of exactly how this works. So, and finally, let's talk a little bit about overhead. This is a true document from 2020 from Mr. Clark in the United Kingdom. Mr. Clark said hilariously, I got this letter from Aviva, which is a big pension company in the United Kingdom, AVIVA, I think, to show how my pension is coming along. He wanted to make sure it's shared. It makes that whole apples analogy at the beginning of everything else to make sense. As you can see from the photo below, the pension investment gained, excluding payments, is £5.94, about $7.64, and he was charged £5.99 for the pleasure. They took all his profits and then some. So you got to look at the overhead as well of pensions. So it all spells a very bleak picture. So the question is, government pensions or pensions in general, are they legal Ponzi schemes? The proof is retirees are funded by payments from younger people. We got that clear at the beginning. Remember that 3-to-1 ratio? Pension funds invest in low-risk treasuries and bonds, but now they're beginning to go out the risk curve. The core stuff of what they've historically invested in are negative yielding. That's why companies like CalPERS are desperate to fix that. People are living longer. People aren't having babies as well. And funds are running out of money, and asset managers are using your money to short stuff. And of course, there are less young people to support older people. It's kind of the proof of the pudding. It's a real serious situation. So the question is, how do you fix this? Solutions: you can tax workers to death, which they're doing in many places already. You can restrict pensions to those who need it the most, i.e. the poorest. Have that analysis done, but that wouldn't make politicians very popular. You can raise retirement age. They're already doing that in many places. People used to dream of retiring at 60, and then 65, and then 67. Now it's 70. It sometimes horrifies me when I go to a store and I see people working, and one lady, I asked her the other day how old she was. She was 78 and still working the cash register, and it just broke my heart. And then investment funds are investing in high-risk assets to try and get more alpha. But the question is, why don't they look at Bitcoin? And I know it's only a matter of time before these big pension funds start allocating, because they've been talking about it for years, but the time is coming. And that will be great for Bitcoin, and that's why this is a Bitcoin story. So conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, please beware if you're going to depend on a pension. Most pension funds are highly illiquid Ponzis. I proved that a couple of times in this presentation. Bottom line is, millions of people that have been planning their futures based on promises made over decades have no basis in economic reality. I proved that too. And those who find themselves depending on pensions and government benefits will find that their benefit is eroded away due to debasement, or it's non-existent. And many, sadly, will have to revise their lifestyle to a very meager existence. So I'm afraid nothing but not good news here, but it's important to be aware so you can make a plan. The question is, what do you need to do? And blaze your own path, as we say here. And per Saifedean Ammous, Bitcoin is the cheapest way to buy the future, because Bitcoin is the only medium guaranteed not to be debased, no matter how much its value rises. So, heavy one today, full of knowledge, and I hope this will help you all plan better for the future. Big thank you, everybody. Thank you to those that made donations and the moderators in the channel too. Love you all. Take care.